Hello there. Happy Sunday. Julian Ramirez here from thevisualmode.com. Today's video is going to be very short. I'm just going to go over a very simple technique I introduced the last session, which is how to turn images into a video. Excuse me. How to turn image frames into a video using Photoshop. So we're going to get right into it. I'm going to have Photoshop open here already. And I'm going to go to the folder where I have all my images saved that I want to turn into a video. So rather than doing this sequence, I'm going to go ahead and do the portrait one that I actually finished. This is 200 frames from the video that I previously streamed showing how to set up camera animations and camera tracking in Blender. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this directory where all these images are. Make sure that I delete the MP4 that's located in here. I don't want to include that file. So copy that directory, file, scripts, load files into stack, right here on Photoshop. So that's going to allow me to then browse for the folder where all my images are located and paste that into here. And there we go. Here's all the frames I'm about to select to turn into a video. So I'll go ahead and hit Control A and hit OK. And it's going to take a few seconds to load those into the source file or dialog here. There we go. And there's some additional options. I could put attempt to automatically align source images. If you're using a series of screenshots, or you did like a stop motion animation or stop motion off of a camera, or several camera frames from taking what's it called, continuous shooting right on a camera, you can auto align them so it's a bit smoother. And creating a smart object after loading layers, up to you depending on how you use Photoshop. But in this case, I don't need to use either of those because my animation already has everything sort of baked into it. So I'll just go ahead and hit OK. Now this is the lengthy part where it's going to take a little bit to load each frame into the dialog here, or into the, it's going to take a little bit to load each file. No, it's actually going fairly quickly from what I'm used to. And we see it counting down there, loading one by one. I'll take this opportunity while we're waiting for this to load to explain that you can then also in Photoshop draw things into different frames. If that's something that you wanted to do, say through a Wacom tablet or straight onto your computer using the mouse, or if you wanted to do overlays onto different frames, if you wanted to stylize different frames in different ways. An example of where we see this is in the movie Into the Spider-Verse. Right, so we could see like how different frames use different techniques for shading sometimes. So for example, right here, there's this moment where the main character sort of has a spider sense go off, and then you have these lines come in and fade out and this new background appear, and you have something similar happen just a little bit later, and it changes color. So if you wanted to have those elements sort of change color, and or add different elements to your animation using Photoshop, it's a good way to do it this way when you export frames individually, and then you're able to edit these sequences individually and export the whole animation as one. Another example where this happens is when you're swinging through the city here. So if you watch the movie, you'll see that I mean, you have this sort of shading technique where it's using dots to represent shadows or highlights, or was it dashes? It looks like straight lines for shadows and white dots for highlights. Yeah. That's not the image I clicked on though. When he's swinging through the street, you start to see that actually like some of the cars or different elements of the street look photoreal, and they're actually stylized using a tool like Photoshop or like After Effects to make it look more illustrated, and then actually introduce the animated character over top of that. So Photoshop or After Effects can be useful to put these things together. So now that we have the frames set up into here, right, all in order, you see that they're all visible, and you look at the bottom right for the layers. So now in order to turn this into an animation, we're going to go into Window, Timeline. All right, so we have the timeline open right here. I'm going to just snap that to the bottom of the screen. And I'm just going to click on the center here where it says Create Frame Animation. All right, so there's our first frame. So in order to have each one of these layers become a frame in the animation, I'm going to go ahead and hit these bars on the top right-hand side of the timeline window. Go to Make Frames from Layers. Right, so that's going to automatically make each one last, basically be immediate, right, from the previous one. So I can go ahead and hit play, and I can see the animation play through, you know, at the speed that it's able to. So if you remember for the last session, or if you're here for the last session, you may be noticing that it's actually playing in reverse from the camera motion that was set up. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop, go back to that menu on the top right, and I'm going to go to reverse frames, right? So that now if I go back to the first frame and I play through, we actually see it, you know, play from the beginning. I was testing out some different like cloud settings here for the scene, which is why you're noticing this glitchiness, but I'm pretty content with how this camera motion is working. And again, I'm not actually, for my purposes in my project, I was able to use this exercise as a chance to explain camera tracking, but I'm actually interested in using individual frames for the comic book, right? So probably go with one of the first ones over here and then jump to something like this, maybe like a few throughout the middle before I actually zoom into the space over here. So very much still just mocking up the different sequences or the different images I'm going to be laying out. All right, so now that we have this set up, how do we export this as a video? So I'll go to File, Export, Render Video. Wait for that to load. Shouldn't be taking that long. There we go. Select where it's going to export to. So I can pick where my frames came out of. Right here for the first sequence. And I will name it, I'll just date it. For the first sequence. There we are. And what format you're going to export as. So if you're used to using QuickTime or any other format beyond what is, you know, used, I'm going to keep it to the document size for the resolution. Keep it at 30 frames per second. The format I'm doing is H.264, which is an MPEG-4 format, MP4 format. And I'll do the range of frames, which is going to be all the frames, right? So go ahead and hit render. And then that's going to take some time here. See, exporting video. I'll go to that folder. So we see the file right there. And it looks like it's finished. I'll go ahead and play it. Nice. That's fairly smooth. We still have a little bit of that camera weirdness, which again, I explained in the last video how I would go in there and kind of tweak that. So the solution from this point would probably be to not have the tracking from one object to the other switch at the same time as the camera lands in this position and then continues to the following position. So kind of spread those out a bit better, or spread those out a bit more. So it takes a bit longer to go through that transition and it's not so jagged. All right. So there you go. That's how you take frames such as JPEGs or PNGs that you get out of software like Blender or any other, put them into Photoshop and then export a video. As I was explaining briefly, if I go to any one frame down here, if I go to say frame 88 and I were to paint over it, frame 88 is actually frame 87. If I were to say add with a brush, like some kind of color effect or glow, not with that brush. Ooh. Let's do it sooner. Let's say I go to frame 5. There we are. and I wanted to do something to this frame that's a bit different from the others, like say I gave it a glow right here underneath. I'll decrease the opacity on that. Sure. Frame 5, there we are. And then I go to the next frame. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I go to the next frame, and on the next frame, I make it a bit smaller or less opaque. And on the next frame, I do the same. This is kind of how you paint frame by frame, which is slowly a skill that's less and less needed thanks to AI. But, you know, in the old school days when you had to animate, this is how you added effects or how you stylized each frame. So then when you go through these frames, you'll actually see now what I painted in show through, right? So if you wanted to go the old school way and kind of apply those effects yourself, you know, each one of these frames can be painted over, obviously, in Photoshop, and then ultimately in animation, you'll see those come through. So you could use a 3D scene as a base and then actually do stylized options in Photoshop if you wanted to. So thanks for watching. It's going to be a short one because it's a Sunday. Really tired from the week, but I had to get this video done so that I can showcase this when I edit the clip from the last session. So, and it's something I didn't get to show in the last session. So it's something that definitely makes its way into my workflow when I'm exporting single frames rather than a whole video out of Blender, which I also explained in that last video why I'd rather do one or the other depending on different scenarios. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.